Welcome to another story. If you love stories that resonate with the heart, you've come to the right place. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on our journey. The Apartment Across the Hall. Chapter 1. A New Beginning, a Lingering Echo. Lena Williams was only 29 when she moved into the apartment at 4B. Her life had been turned upside down a few months prior when she found herself alone for the first time in years. Her marriage to Alex, once full of laughter and shared dreams, had quietly unraveled. No drama, no shouting matches. Just a slow, painful drift, until one day the silence became too heavy to ignore. With a heart as heavy as the moving boxes she lugged up to her new apartment, Lena made the decision to leave behind the life she once knew. A cozy house in the suburbs, the familiar friends, and a predictable routine. She needed space. She needed a change. The city was bustling, vibrant, and most importantly, anonymous. The apartment she found was small but charming, nestled in a quiet building near the park. Its creaky hardwood floors, the view of the street below, and the scent of old wood and fresh paint offered a comforting sense of renewal. But it wasn't just the apartment that caught her attention. It was the neighbor across the hall. From the moment she'd moved in, she'd noticed the door to 4A. It was always slightly ajar, a soft creak whenever the wind blew, just right. She couldn't help but wonder who lived behind it. Whoever it was, they didn't seem to follow the same rhythms of the building. While Lena had heard the usual clatter of neighbors coming and going, Foray was always eerily still, as if no one ever crossed that threshold. Then, one rainy evening, as Lena was fumbling with her keys, she saw him. A man mid-30s, with dark, disheveled hair, wearing a long coat and a weary expression. He was standing just outside 4A, his hand hovering near the doorknob as if he was deciding whether or not to enter. When he looked up, their eyes met for the briefest moment. There was a flicker of recognition, though neither of them had ever met. He offered a small, tight smile, then disappeared behind the door. Curiosity gnawed at Lena as she walked to her apartment. Who was he? Why did he seem so familiar? Chapter 2. The Sound of Silence. The days passed, and Lena's life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. She'd started her freelance graphic design work, spent hours in the local coffee shop, and made the occasional trip to the market. It was a quiet life, but it was hers. Or at least, it felt like it might be. But every time she passed 4A, her thoughts would inevitably drift to him. The man across the hall. The one who never seemed to leave. One evening, while she was sitting on her couch, sketching a new design for a client, she heard something faint through the walls. It was a soft sound, at first just a low murmur, then a brief, sharp exhale, a sound that seemed so personal, so intimate. She froze, wondering if she was imagining it. But no. It came again, followed by the faint sound of a chair scraping against the floor. For the next few nights, Lena became almost hyper-aware of the noises coming from 4A. There was a sort of rhythm to them, like someone was pacing back and forth, then stopping abruptly, as though they were thinking or waiting for something. She tried to shake the feeling off, dismissing it as nothing more than the sounds of an old building. But one night, as she stood in front of her door, trying to gather the courage to knock on 4's door, she felt something pull her back. It wasn't fear exactly, but a sense of hesitation. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because, in some strange way, she knew that crossing that threshold would change things. Chapter 3. A Conversation Never Had. It wasn't until the third week of living in the apartment that Lena finally saw him again. This time, it wasn't by accident. She had decided to take the stairs rather than the elevator after a frustrating day at work. As she climbed, she heard the soft shuffle of footsteps ahead of her. She looked up just in time to see the man from across the hall step into view. "Sorry," he said as their eyes met again. Didn't mean to make you wait. Lena hesitated before responding. She wasn't sure why, but it felt important. The briefest of moments hung in the air between them, filled with unspoken words. Not a problem, she replied, offering a smile. I think we're both in the same building, after all. There was a small chuckle from him. I suppose we are. I'm Ethan, he said, extending his hand. Ethan Cross. Lena, she replied, shaking his hand briefly. I'm in 4B. They both stood for a moment in silence. The air felt heavy with something neither of them had yet figured out. Ethan shifted his weight, glancing at the door to his apartment. Well, I should probably get going, he said, his voice quieter now. Nice to finally meet you, Lena. You too, she replied, watching as he disappeared behind the door to 4A. For the rest of the night, Lena couldn't shake the feeling of the encounter. There was something about Ethan, an intensity, an undercurrent of sadness, or maybe it was just the way his words had hung in the air. Chapter 4, The Unspoken Story. The weeks that followed were strange. She began to notice little things about Ethan, like how he would always be at the cafe at the same time as her, always with the same empty cup, as though he was waiting for someone who never showed up. She saw him in the hallway sometimes, his eyes distant, his body language closed off. Yet, despite the distance he maintained, there was something about him that intrigued her. She found herself watching him from her window, wondering if the man she saw was the same man who spent endless nights pacing behind closed doors. It was late one night when she finally saw it, the last piece of the puzzle. She had been lying in bed when a soft knock on her door pulled her from her sleep. She stumbled out of bed, still groggy, and opened the door. There, standing in the hallway, was Ethan. I'm sorry to bother you, he began, his voice filled with hesitation. But I wanted to ask if you had a moment. I need someone to talk to. Lena felt her heart race as she opened the door wider, letting him step inside. She knew, without a doubt, that this moment would shift everything. Chapter 5, Unraveling the Past. The conversation that night stretched late into the hours. Ethan spoke of loss, a woman he had once loved, who had vanished from his life years ago. A woman he had never fully let go of. He told her about the grief that had kept him in this apartment, isolated and disconnected from the world. He spoke of memories, regrets, and the way certain things linger in your heart like scars that never heal. For Lena, it felt like the walls between them were finally coming down. She shared pieces of her own story, of her marriage, her heartache, and how she had come to this apartment seeking a fresh start. She realized, as the night wore on, that she hadn't been seeking a new life at all. She had been seeking closure. In the quiet of that moment, as their words wove together, they understood something that neither had expected. They weren't just two strangers living across the hall. They were two souls, scarred and healing in parallel. As the conversation came to a close, the first rays of dawn filtered through the window. Ethan stood to leave, his shoulders a little lighter, his eyes a little softer. I'm glad I knocked, he said, offering a rare, genuine smile. Me too, Lena whispered. Chapter 6, The Space Between Words. The days after Ethan's visit were different. Lena noticed subtle shifts in their interactions, a quiet understanding when their paths crossed in the hall, a brief smile that lingered just a little longer than it had before. It wasn't exactly friendship yet, but it was something close to it. An unspoken connection that had sprouted in the silence of the night. Lena found herself anticipating the moments when she'd see him in the hallway or when they'd both end up at the same coffee shop. She no longer felt the nagging loneliness that had once weighed her down so heavily. There was something comforting about knowing someone else in the building was experiencing their own kind of solitude. And sometimes, knowing you're not entirely alone in your heartache makes it a little more bearable. One evening, as Lena returned from a late-night walk, she found Ethan sitting outside the building on the stone steps. His head was tilted back, and his eyes were closed, as though he was letting the night air settle around him. He looked tired, but there was a kind of peace in the way he sat, a stillness that she hadn't seen in him before. She approached quietly, unsure of whether she should disturb him. But he sensed her presence before she spoke. Hey, he said, not opening his eyes, but smiling a little. Couldn't sleep. Lena leaned against the railing beside him. I know the feeling. They both sat in silence, the hum of the city swirling around them, but somehow in that moment, It felt like they were in their own little world. She wasn't sure what to say, but somehow that felt okay. She didn't have to fill every moment with words. Just being there was enough. After a while, Lena broke the silence. Sometimes I think about all the things we never say. To people we should. Or to people who don't even know how much they've hurt us. Ethan's eyes opened, and he turned to her. His gaze was intense, but there was a softness in his expression that hadn't been there before. I used to think it was all just too late. That there was no point in saying things that should have been said long ago. Lena nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. And now, he paused, as if searching for the right words. Now I think maybe there's always a point. Even if it's just for ourselves. They both fell into quiet again, the kind of silence that wasn't awkward, but full of shared understanding. It was like the weight they had been carrying was lighter when they didn't have to speak it out loud. Chapter 7. Unraveling the Heart. The weeks that followed were marked by more of these quiet exchanges. Sometimes Lena would find Ethan on the steps, sometimes she'd run into him in the cafe. Other times, their conversations would happen in the hall or in the courtyard. It wasn't always deep, and it wasn't always about their pasts. But there was something in the way they shared those small moments, something that made her realize how much she had been holding back from everyone, even from herself. One rainy afternoon, Lena sat down at the small cafe near the building, absently stirring her coffee, lost in her thoughts. The door chimed as someone entered, and she looked up, expecting it to be just another customer. But it was Ethan, looking tired but steady. He spotted her immediately and came over, a soft, almost hesitant smile on his face. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, already sliding into the chair across from her. "Not at all," Lena replied, her smile instinctive. There was something familiar in the way he made himself at home, even in the simple act of sitting down. "I've been thinking about something," he said, leaning forward a little, his expression more serious than usual. Lena raised an eyebrow. "What about?" "I've been thinking about the last time I let someone get close," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "It's been a while. And I think that's part of the reason I've been keeping to myself for so long. I wasn't sure I could handle the mess that came with letting someone in again." Lena's heart gave a little lurch. She hadn't realized how much she had wanted to hear those words, that someone else had felt the same way she did, that fear of vulnerability after pain. "I get that," she said softly. "I've been there too." Ethan nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "Lena, I'm not sure what this is, or where it's going. But I'm starting to think it's okay not to know. Maybe I don't need all the answers." She smiled then, something real and unforced. "Yeah, I think that's what I've been missing. The not needing all the answers." They sat there for a long while, talking about everything and nothing. About how life wasn't always neat and tidy, and about the things that lingered in the corners of their minds. They didn't reach any grand conclusions, but for the first time in a long time, Lena felt like maybe, just maybe, everything she had been searching for was already right here in front of her. Chapter 8. The Door That's Opened. The following weekend, as spring began to settle in, Lena made a decision. She didn't know why, but she felt it was time. After a long day of work, she took the elevator to the 5th floor. She hesitated in front of 4's door, her hand hovering just above the knob. She didn't know what she expected when she knocked, but she felt like this was a threshold she had to cross. Ethan opened the door. His hair was messy, as though he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes were tired but warm. "Lena," he said, his voice a little rough. "Everything okay?" She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yeah, I wanted to say something. I think I'm ready to be more than just strangers across the hall." His face softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something hopeful in his expression. "I think I am too," he replied quietly, stepping aside to let her in. Chapter 9. Pieces of a Whole. Lena spent that evening at Ethan's apartment, talking more than they ever had before. There were no grand declarations, no promises of forever. Just two people coming together, each a little broken, each a little healed. They shared stories of their pasts, of the people they had lost, of the lives they had tried to rebuild. And in those stories, they began to realize that their brokenness wasn't something to hide. It was something they could share. As the night wore on, Lena found herself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in months. And when the evening came to a close, and she stood to leave, Ethan followed her to the door. "Good night, Lena," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I'm glad you knocked." She smiled, her eyes meeting his for a long moment. "Me too." And as she stepped back into the hallway, the apartment door clicked shut behind her, but she felt something inside her stir, like something was just beginning to fall into place. Chapter 10: The Start of Something New. The days after that evening blurred together in a mix of quiet moments, shared smiles, and soft conversations. Lena and Ethan grew into something undefined, but it was enough. It wasn't a love story with grand gestures. There were no promises, no guarantees. But there was something deeper, a mutual understanding, a shared sense of healing. And in the simplicity of it all, Lena found what she had been looking for all along. Not an escape from her past, but a way to embrace it alongside someone who was doing the same. As she lay in bed that night, the sound of the city drifting through her window, she realized that life, like love, didn't always need to be perfect. Sometimes it just needed to be real. And for the first time in a long while, Lena felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Thank you for watching to the end. If this story touched you, support the video with a like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more exciting stories to come that will stay with us for a long time. See you soon.